Great to meet you, everybody. I'm Isaiah Taylor. I'm the founder and CEO of Valor Atomics. We are building nuclear reactors built for planetary scale. And actually, it's very hot in here, so I'm going to take my jacket off. Give me a second. Let's see if I can do this without revealing washboard abs, everybody. That's a joke. All right. What is progress? We're at a progress conference here. Progress is actually very simple. Progress is smart people taking risks, which make the experience of man more heavenly. Right? Mankind is under the curse of the fall. There is hardship and toil and death. And progress is when smart people take risks and reverse that. So it sounds like I'm oversimplifying things, but I'm actually not. And I want to show you how we are holding progress back today. Hard to do in 30 minutes, but let's give it a shot. So now, even though progress itself is very simple, the tapestry is very rich and complex. So I want to focus on just one little slice of progress today. And I think what I have to say translates to the rest of it, but let's try to focus in on one simple concept. And that one frame is physical superabundance. So the idea of everything physical becoming free. This is what we're really trying to do in the industrial economy, right? You can sort of simplify the industrial economy to trying to make everything free. And I think around this room today, we can try to diagnose and predict what's holding us back from everything becoming free. So you've heard of a theory of everything, right? These are like fun ideas to, string theory and whatever. This is my theory of everything physical, and particularly industrially physical. So here's my simple theory. I call it DEI, but it's not the acronym you're thinking of. This stands for dexterity, energy, and intelligence. So here's my claim. Every physical thing around you, everything that's a product that you can touch, right? Chairs, microphone, screen, all this kind of stuff, are actually only made of three ingredients: energy, intelligence, and dexterity. So let me show you what I mean. I'm holding an iPhone here, and it's made of three things. They're energy powered, the smelting of it, the manufacturing, the assembly lines. Human intelligence, for the most part, designed the software, actually figured out what order to put the machines in it, designed the individual parts. And then dexterity, which is, robot arms or human hands, assembled the components, polished up the glass, boxed it up. You could take something simpler than this as well, right? A pencil, right? So in a pencil, you still have energy, right? You have energy processing the wood and the graphite from the raw materials, human intelligence in designing the pencil and making sure that it has a hexagonal edge so it doesn't roll off your desk and nice things like that. And then again, there's dexterity of actually manipulating those machines and making sure the wood gets to the right place. This is even true of the physical inputs to those processes. So click down a level into this, you have graphite, right? But that itself is a function of those other three things, right? You had energy to run the mining trucks and the rigs. You had intelligence to know where to mine and how to drive the truck. You had dexterity in the miner's hands and at the end of the drill bit and the shovel. And you can click one level further if you really want to into those mining machines. Turns out those mining machines are made of energy, intelligence, and dexterity. Everything is made of energy, intelligence, and dexterity. So this isn't just a parlor trick. It's actually how we can understand the entire arc of human civilization. So in the agricultural age, where were the energy, intelligence, and dexterity? The energy was basically just solar, right? So pretty much all of our energy was solar because crops are grown on solar power, and then humans eat crops, and then we have carbohydrates, and we have ATP, and then our muscles actuate things. This is also true of farm animals, right? They're also eating crops, which are, pulling a plow. So energy was pretty much solar. All intelligence was human, and dexterity was split between human hands, animals, and a couple very simple implements. The Industrial Revolution changed that a lot, right? So this was a big change. We unlocked different energy formats, right? So suddenly we had fossil fuels, right? We found energy underground. This unlocked a lot, especially oil, right? Because oil is a liquid, and that makes it easy to put into machines. And so suddenly we have a ton of energy. We also changed dexterity a lot, right? The fact that we have a liquid fuel means that you can run a machine. Machines are very dexterous. They're easy to be dexterous in the same way over and over, which is super important. Then we got to the computer age, and the computer age mostly brought us up to speed in intelligence, right? And it's really baking human intelligence into a system. And right now, where we are, we stand at the threshold of AI and robotics. We're about to get two of the three arms basically for free, right? We're about to get really good dexterity and really good non-human intelligence, right? Replicatable intelligence. And if you could add abundant energy to that, something very magical would happen, which is that the cost of physical goods would approach zero, right? Because again, all physical things are made of three things. They're made of energy, intelligence, and dexterity. Intelligence and dexterity are becoming free. Energy is what I'm working on. It's not quite there yet, but this is where the arc of history is pointing. It's pointing to a state where everything physical becomes free, where the material constraints that have bound humanity for all of history simply dissolve. I believe that we can feel this in our bones. It's why the best and the brightest people in the world want to work for companies like SpaceX and OpenAI and Valor Atomics. We know instinctively that the world is going to get better and better. But here's what we really need to understand. This future is guaranteed, but not necessarily for us, not necessarily in America, right? Because even though this happens as a function of the ingenuity of man, it can be stopped. And in the West right now, it is being stopped, and we need to understand why. So this is really the question why. Where did all the builders go? And I think the why is actually because America is drowning in smart people. America has faltered because we are drowning in smart people, and we're starved for risk takers. If you want to know where is progress, you can ask yourself two questions. You can ask, where are the smart people and where are the risk takers? For the last 20 years, the answer to both of those questions has been the same. San Francisco and software, right? All the smart risk takers moved to Silicon Valley in search of gold. Why? What is it about software that attracted all the smart risk takers? I think in order to understand this, and by the way, feel free to heckle me. I actually asked a few people to heckle me beforehand. So yeah, thanks, Packy. I think in order to understand this, we have to classify the types of risk and understand what it is that innovators are after. See, I don't actually think that it's fundamentally money. Money is nice, it's great, but I actually don't think that's what innovators are fundamentally going for. No, innovators are glory hunters. They are seeking honor. In her 1999 book, Teaching a Stone to Talk, Annie Dillard has this beautiful but devastating anecdote where she talks about the Franklin expeditions into the Arctic in the 1800s. She talks about the ships leaving in splendor from England, where Franklin himself says, "The highest object of my desire is to faithfully perform my duty." 2 months later, after they left, a British whaling ship captain met the two barks in Lancaster Sound, and he reported back to England of the high spirits and officers of the men. He was the last person to see any of them alive. Many years later, follow-up expeditions sent to discover their tragic fate found these men frozen, still clutching what are to me the most incredible objects. They were clutching silver spoons and family crests. Their bodies were preserved by the ice. And while it's tragic, it's such an incredible image to me because they had absolute certainty of death in that moment and absolute certainty of the failure of their mission. But they also had certainty of honor. And to this day, we remember them fondly for that. We honor those who went before, even if their missions utterly fail. And we name ships after them, and we put them in history books, and we tell our children about them. This is actually fundamentally what innovators in a society are chasing. This is the engine of innovation that drives progress. It's actually honor. So where does honor go to die? What's the one place where there is no honor in a society? It's the justice system, right? The justice system in a society is sort of the anti-honor badge. It's the place where you particularly put dishonor on somebody as a society collectively. Even the accusation of doing something illegal kills honor in a society. There is no upside to that risk vector. People brag about the early days of a startup. They like to talk about when they were sleeping on the floor, when they were driving the Toyota Corolla. They're trying to say, I was poor, I didn't have any money, right? And this is actually part of the honor. We're perfectly fine saying that. They have a much harder time talking about any of the laws or regulations that they skirted in the process of building that company, right? That's actually one place that, they're relatively silent about, even though it probably happened in a lot of endeavors. And this is because the core of a society's punitive justice system is to inflict that on members who have ill will toward the society. That's what the thing is for. So for an entrepreneur, going to jail, it's not about the fact that it threatens failure or it threatens to take away the money and the progress. It threatens to black mark that inventor, and it strikes to the core of what he was actually getting for. Another way to say this is that innovators have risk budgets, right? So they're already risking financial security. They're risking life and limb, right? In many cases, they might be risking explosions in a workshop or chemical exposures or high voltage accidents. they don't also want to risk honor. That's the one thing they're actually trying to get. Now, as a society becomes richer, it begins to overgrow its regulatory function. And the regulatory function is tied to justice and it's tied to honor. Now, here's what's difficult about this, right? Each individual regulation seems reasonable on its surface. And in fact, not just reasonable, regulations really are written in blood, right? Safety standards really do save lives. But the cumulative effect on innovation is actually suffocating. Let me give you a concrete thought experiment to think about this. Imagine that cars didn't exist today, right? So we have modern society exactly as it is. You have smartphones, we have great buildings, we have Netflix, but we don't have cars. All right. And then imagine trying to invent a car in 2025. How do you think this would go? Right? You walk into a room of regulators and you try to convince them it's acceptable for ordinary people, people, right? Like ordinary people to drive a 3-ton vehicle down the road at 70 miles an hour with another 3-ton vehicle driving down the road at 70 miles an hour in the opposite direction, passing 3 feet apart, and both of them are driven by teenagers. How is that going to go? In fact, you'd even have to tell the regulator that tens of thousands of people will die, right, on those roads that you're planning on building, that the air will be filled with toxic emissions. Could you get that approved today? Absolutely not. You couldn't get a car approved in 2025. But here's the interesting thing about how technology develops. Cars were actually being driven for years before they were regulated, right? Airplanes were flown way before we had the CAA. Houses were built before we discovered building codes, and nuclear fission was discovered in Alfred Loomis's basement. Societies can be taught to adopt things that weren't naturally in their risk tolerance window, but only once they make it a certain way through the adoption curve, right? You're always going to have a risk-averse portion of society. You're going to have the mass scale portion of society. That's where regulatory bodies live. But they have to get far enough that you can actually see the benefit in order for them to be adopted. And the problem with American society is that we've deleted the left side of the adoption curve in the physical world. We've deleted the innovation phase, the garage workshop phase, the testing phase, the prototype phase, and we've also deleted the ramp from that to small-scale deployment. You can't get from zero to small-scale deployment anymore. The distance is too far. The regulatory moat is too wide. And I believe this gives us the key to understanding the flight to Silicon Valley. By making everything in the physical world practically illegal, we have removed the core incentive from the innovator, the honor of the society that they're in. When a society becomes wealthy, it overgrows that regulatory function, and the likelihood of being caught and the consequence of being caught becomes too risky on the one thing that the innovator actually wants to protect, which is honor. Except in one place, software. You can be a cowboy on a laptop, right? You generally won't break the law unless you're specifically trying to be malicious. It's pretty hard to break the law unless you're really actually trying to do something bad. And this is so true that even when people are actually doing something bad, like legitimately doing terrible things on the internet community tends to like gang up on the government to protect that person, right? Push for convictions to be overturned, push for the president to pardon somebody, right? In fact, we end up like building these like subcultures of like heroes around people who break the law on the internet. The message is clear. Messing around on a laptop is a protected zone. Think about the greatest inventions of the industrial age. Aluminum electrolysis, right? Very dangerous process. You're putting a ton of voltage through molten alumina. It was developed by Charles Hall in a woodshed behind his house, right? Nuclear fission, came out of private laboratories in New York. Early aircraft were built by bicycle mechanics in their shop, right? The automobile was assembled in garages and barns. So let me ask you a question. Would any of these stand up to OSHA today? Right? Would any of these stand up to environmental impact statement? Who's going to fill out an environmental impact statement for any of that? It's not going to happen. Of course not. They'd be shut down before the prototype was complete. Now compare this to software. Another way to say this is that the substrate of software is actually pure physics and logic. It's electricity flowing through silicon, zeros and ones. You're able to innovate. The substrate of the physical world is regulation. Right? In El Segundo, where my company is based, where there's a lot of amazing entrepreneurs building many things, The actual substrate of what they're dealing with every day is mostly regulation, like in some cases greater than 50%. By the time a kid takes a model rocket out to the desert to fly, he's in violation of at least 10 federal regulations on unmanned aircraft, BLM permits for desert land use, potential EPA rules, fire codes, transportation of hazardous materials. But you can spend years on your laptop building apps, writing code, creating platforms, and not interface with federal regulations even once. This is why we have made remarkable progress in software. It's a protected zone where smart people can take infinite risk in the type that they want to take, right? Financial risk, these sorts of things, and get infinite reward, and where they won't go to jail for trying. Now, when this argument has been made in the past, think of Marc Andreessen's famous graph about the economy becoming regulated industries. The general pushback has been to say, well, big whoop. If people are true risk takers, why can't they take those types of risks too? Can't they just figure out those channels, figure out those paths, just like you figure out the constraints of software? But I think this misses the very fundamental thing about what drives people to be innovators, which is not primarily money, because you can make a lot of money in a regulated industry. It is taking away the risk and reward center for what they care about, which is the glory of their society. Innovators are expeditionaries. They're like those guys, leaving from England. They're striking out into the unknown, and they want to be honored even in potential failure. When I was starting Valor Atomics, my nuclear energy company, I made a remarkable discovery. There is no island anywhere in United States jurisdiction where you could split an atom of uranium without completing a full environmental impact statement. Not a single island. There's no remote rock anywhere on Earth under the jurisdiction of the United States, territory or otherwise, where you can do that without an EIS. Now think about that. We discovered nuclear fission in basement laboratories. We built the first nuclear reactor under the football stands at the University of Chicago. And today you can't conduct basic research on a remote uninhabited island without years of regulatory review. I believe that people, even people like you, people at a progressive conference, have no idea the extent to which technology level is a policy choice. The level of the technology in our society is a policy choice. The United States could have 10 times cheaper energy than it has today. We know how to build it. The technology exists. We were on track. We could have revolutionary energy abundance. We know how to do it. And what's funny is I'm actually not even saying that this is unequivocally like the right choice, right? Perhaps the downsides genuinely outweigh the upsides of having cheaper energy. And that's, hard for me to argue, but I'm open to the argument, right? That's a legitimate discussion, but we have to look at it with clear eyes. We are systemically choosing not to. So you've heard the rebuttal to this, right? And the rebuttal's real. They're, regulatory codes are written in blood. They are repositories of hard-earned lessons. Fire codes are literally written outside of the morgue, studying what went wrong. So of course we need regulations. Of course we do. But here's the problem. Regulations are written about technologies. And technologies are historical artifacts. They're things in the past, right? Technologies are things that exist. They've already been invented. They've already been learned about. And then you set guardrails around them. Innovation is about future things. It's about things that don't exist yet. They are genuinely unknown. They can't be known in advance. That's the whole point of them. You can only kill the future. You can't regulate it. Let me say it again. This is really important. You can only kill the future. You can't regulate it. You can regulate something once it exists. You can set the rules by which a technology scales across the United States from sea to shining sea. You can say, here's how cars are manufactured now that we know them, and understand them. But you can't write the rules for something that doesn't exist yet. When you try, what you actually do is just prevent it from existing. I'm not taking this lightly. What is more dangerous? A nation where small experiments sometimes go wrong and people get hurt or killed, or a nation where we don't build anything, right? Where our geopolitical rivals own the entire techno-capital machine of the entire globe, right? Those are real heavy alternatives, right? People die in either circumstance. But one of these is an existential risk to everyone on Earth, right? To you, to your children, to your grandchildren. The other is bodily risk to a small group of individuals who voluntarily choose that for themselves. We now know with the clarity of hindsight that the NRC, for example, was responsible for ravaging the rare earths industry in the United States. This turns out to have been one of the most geopolitically dangerous mistakes in American history. We handed an entire strategic industry to China. The NRC also effectively shuttered nuclear energy development for decades, but that's a harder line to draw. It's a little bit more indirect. Yet even knowing this, with perfect information about the consequences, we find it almost impossible to do anything about it. Why is this? I believe that the reason is that the nature of totalizing centralized regulation is to make sure that nothing happens, right? This is just kind of structurally how you can expect it to work. The safest airplane is no airplane. The safest reactor is no reactor. The cleanest rare earth processing site is no rare earth processing site. The most environmentally friendly mine is no mine at all. From a regulator's perspective, this logic is perfect. They can never be blamed for what doesn't exist. And yet we need airplanes. We need reactors. We need rare earth processing. We need mines. These are what civilizations are made of. I don't believe that individual centralized regulatory bodies are really capable of making these civilizational level trade-offs. The decisions are too large, and the consequences for the bad decisions, especially in the negative side, are too diffuse. Who deserves blame for shuttering our nuclear industry? I'm debating about Mark with this 30 minutes before our talk. It's like, whose fault is it, right? It's actually hard to figure these things out. Who is being deprived of honor for robbing the country of processing rare earths? So here's what's kind of interesting and somewhat maddening to me. I believe that our founding fathers actually created a system of government which was supposed to handle this. And really what they did is they created a system of government which is anti-fragile. So let me explain what I mean by that. Obviously, I'm stealing from Taleb here. A fragile system admits of no small errors, right? It tries to make sure that nothing goes wrong. And what that means is that it accumulates stress and cracks until catastrophic failure. And in this case, we're talking about the catastrophic failure in my industry of nuclear. We don't build nuclear reactors anymore. An anti-fragile system uses small errors as information, right? So when this thing goes wrong, you learn from it. When that thing goes wrong, you learn from it. And our federal system was actually designed to be anti-fragile. 50 different states means 50 different forms of government, 50 different regulatory regimes, 50 different approaches to risk. This means you have 50 shots on goal, right? 50 chances to convince a group of people to try something new, to do something different, to build and to experiment. By concentrating federal power, we have flattened the variance. We've eliminated spikiness from our society. Here's why this matters practically. Decisions about risk really ought to be pushed down to the people who will bear the consequences. Washington, D.C. cannot ask the people of Nevada to take more or less risk about nuclear energy. They have to decide for themselves, and they're capable of making that decision. The people of Texas can decide what building codes make sense for Texas. The people of Florida can decide what level of hurricane protection they want to mandate versus making housing affordable. Capital is very flexible. It flows to opportunity. Talent can come from anywhere. The motivations of talented innovators are as varied as the tapestry of human experience, but the EPA is God. OSHA waits for no man. Building codes and fire codes are treated as fixed laws of the universe rather than local policy choices. We have reduced the variance of our society. Societies have to have edges to them. Let me explain what I mean by edges. Edges are places where the rules are different. They're places where there's room to experiment, where you can try something without betting your fundamental honor and your legal freedom on whether it works. The federal government is not good at edges. This is not something they excel at. Edges are organic. They emerge. They just happen when you give them space. And in fact, I believe that when you look at mankind, you will always see edges. But I'm interested in the future of this country, in the future of America. The situation that we've created is that edges do exist, but they exist outside the boundaries of our country. And if the edges exist outside the boundaries of our country, then so do the innovators. And so does the next wave of technology, and so does the future. And this is already happening. This should frighten you. Advanced manufacturing is moving to China and Southeast Asia. Genetic research is moving to Singapore. Drone development is happening in Shenzhen faster than anywhere in the US. There's one little company in El Segundo who's challenging that. The edges have moved outside our borders, and when the edges move, so does the future. Now, again, the objection will be, isn't safety important? Don't we need regulations? And of course we do. But we also need to understand that safety actually doesn't come from the regulation. This is a really important point. Safety doesn't come from regulation. It comes from innovation. Again, let's go back to the example of cars. Cars today are vastly, incomparably safer than cars were in the 1950s. What drove that progress? Was it regulation or was it innovation? It was absolutely innovation, right? It was individual engineers and companies realizing, specifically in Sweden, realizing that a seatbelt constrains the frame of your body to the deceleration rate of the frame of the car, which means that a crumple zone in the front of the car, gets translated linearly throughout your body, so you're not subjected to a 300 G shock event. Regulation codified the victories, but it didn't create that innovation. So, and here's the sharp sort of this. If in your normalization of that innovation, you also cut off new innovation, you've lost. Right? So we do have to bring the bar up, right? We do have to normalize once people innovate. But if you cut off the left hand where you're actually doing that, you're going to lose. Technological progress is the story of doing more with less, of lifting more lives from poverty and toil with fewer trade-offs, with less pollution, with less waste, with less danger. But you can't regulate your way to that. You can only build your way there. Let me take you somewhere for a moment. I want you to imagine the science fiction future that lives in your head. We all have flying cars, or more likely something better than cars that we haven't imagined yet. Cheap, healthy, abundant food, beautiful housing with no mold or decay, fast, comfortable transportation, clean air, stunning architecture. All of these things are possible today, not in 100 years, today. We know how to build these things. We can live in a society where practically everything physical is free, where energy is so cheap it's barely worth metering, where manufacturing is so automated and efficient that goods cost almost nothing. We know how to do this today. But here's the question that I find interesting. What are we even saying? What even is a building, right? We think we know what a building is. Concrete, steel, drywall, but maybe it's not. What if a building is actually like a large balloon, right? Like what if it's something that you just inflate and it has like printed layers in it and you can sort of blow it up one day and move somewhere else the next? I have no idea if this can work. This is just a crazy idea, right? What I do know that is that it's absolutely illegal to try, right? That's like one piece of certainty I can give you about that. What is an airplane? Is there even a meaningful distinction between an airplane and a car? Maybe by an airplane, we mean like a quadcopter that takes you to a rocket ship that takes you to another quadcopter, but the whole time you're like in a medicated sleep, so you just like teleport anywhere on Earth. Is that the right way to do transportation? I have no idea, but I can absolutely tell you that it's illegal to find out. What is a mine, right? Is a mine a place where you dig underground? Or is it a pipe that goes out to the ocean and sucks in seawater and processes elements using cheap nuclear heat? And then actually, basically, by the fact that you're leaching elements out of the water, you're changing the dissolution electrostatically in the water, and so it actually remines the entire surface of the Earth. Right? Again, I don't know if this is actually what the future is, but I know that it's illegal to find out. This is the great problem of a rich society. It becomes harder to convince people to let you build than to actually do the building itself. And that is the beginning of a decline. The actual trade-off, the real question before us, is whether we want people to build the future, right? We're not trying to figure out how to build the future. I think what we're actually trying to figure out right now is, do we want people to? And the answer being given to American youth today, at least in the physical world, is no, don't build it. Don't build nuclear reactors. Don't experiment with new materials. Don't try novel construction methods. Don't develop new transportation. Don't mine. Don't manufacture. Don't risk anything. Just code on your laptop where it's safe. But here's the beautiful thing about young people. They're very young. They don't they don't have that brain damage yet, right? They don't have those bad assumptions. They haven't internalized that learned helplessness. They're eager to build, and they can quickly learn how. So the bull case, the reason for optimism here is that you always get another shot on goal with every generation of young people. At any moment, a society can stop making this mistake. It might be too late, but I don't think so. I think that we have a real shot on goal. Will Americans live among the stars? Only if the youth sweat and bleed to take us there. Will we cure cancer and extend human lifespan? Only if the youth sweat and bleed to cure it. Will we create superabundance of energy and goods and food? Only if people who are today in kindergarten and in high school make it so. There's only one way to stop them. Remove the edges where they thrive. Apply the normalization and regulation meant for mass-scaled multi-billion-dollar companies to absolutely everything. Flatten the whole Earth into a perfect, uniform, regulated sameness. Thank you.